It was a cold winter evening when Emily decided to take a walk, needing to escape the tight walls of her apartment and the heavy thoughts that had been pressing on her all day. She pulled her coat tight around her, feeling the sharp bite of the wind against her cheeks, and stepped into the quiet streets blanketed in fresh snow, the world around her muted and still except for the occasional distant car crunching over ice. The streetlights cast a soft golden glow on the snow, creating small pockets of warmth in the otherwise chilling air, and Emily's breath came out in little clouds as she walked, each step echoing softly against the buildings and empty sidewalks. Her mind was racing, a mix of tiredness, loneliness, and a strange yearning for something she couldn't name, when she noticed movement ahead, a figure leaning against a lamppost, partially hidden in the shadows yet somehow illuminated by the soft glow above. He was an older man, his silver hair shimmering faintly in the lamplight, and when he turned to look at her, his eyes held a warmth that seemed almost out of place in the cold evening. Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure why she felt a sudden pull toward him, a curiosity that tinged her chest with an unfamiliar flutter. The man's smile was gentle, not forced, and when he spoke, his voice was low but clear, carrying just enough to be heard over the whispering wind. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" Emily's first instinct was to nod, murmuring her agreement, though part of her wanted to run or pretend she hadn't seen him. Instead, she found herself walking a little closer, drawn by something indefinable in the way he carried himself, a quiet dignity mixed with a subtle vulnerability that made her heart skip unexpectedly. She noticed the lines on his face, not harsh but soft, telling stories of years lived with care and perhaps a hint of sorrow, and something about that made her want to know him, to understand what had shaped this man, who seemed both so ordinary and so extraordinary at the same time. As she approached, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine and smoke from nearby chimneys, a comforting smell that contrasted with the cold air, and she realized that despite the chill, she was no longer thinking about her troubles, only about the man in front of her and the strange pull she felt toward him. He introduced himself as Henry, his voice calm and steady, and though he said nothing about waiting there or why he was standing alone on this snowy street, the way he looked at her made Emily feel like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She noticed the small details, the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his scarf, the careful way he tilted his head as if studying her expression, the soft laugh that escaped him when she stumbled over a word, and each gesture made her chest tighten with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Time seemed to slow as they stood together under the lamppost, the snow falling more insistently now, covering the street in a thick, sparkling blanket, and Emily realized she had been holding her breath without noticing, caught in a moment that was both ordinary and magical. She found herself sharing small bits of her life, almost instinctively, telling him about her day, the frustrations at work, the loneliness that had become a quiet companion, and he listened with a patience and attention that was rare, nodding gently, his eyes never leaving hers. There was a rhythm to their conversation, an unspoken understanding that grew with each sentence, and Emily felt a warmth spreading through her despite the winter chill, a connection that was immediate and disarming. Henry spoke of simple things at first, books he liked, music he had loved teaching, memories of walks he had taken in the city, and yet, in the way he described them, there was a richness and depth that pulled Emily in, making her feel like she was glimpsing a world she had long forgotten existed. Every word he said seemed layered, filled with meaning, and she couldn't help but wonder what stories lay behind his calm demeanor, what joys and heartbreaks had shaped him into the man she was suddenly so drawn to. The snow continued to fall around them, muffling distant sounds, creating a sense of intimacy that felt almost sacred, and Emily realized that for the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not just noticed, but truly seen, by someone who didn't even know her yet somehow understood pieces of her that she had hidden from everyone else. As the evening wore on, the streetlights flickered slightly, and Emily felt a subtle urgency, a desire to linger and yet a fear of imposing, but Henry's quiet presence reassured her, letting her stay in that fragile bubble of shared warmth and gentle curiosity. The moment stretched, the world beyond the lamppost fading, and Emily found herself imagining what it would be like to walk beside him regularly, to hear more of his stories, to simply be near someone whose presence made the cold winter feel less biting. And just when she thought she might step back, uncertain of what she was feeling, Henry tilted his head and said something that made her heart catch. A simple, soft question: "Would you like to walk with me a little?" And in that instant, Emily knew that her life had subtly shifted, that an ordinary walk on a cold winter evening had unexpectedly opened a door to something new, something that felt like the beginning of a story she hadn't even known she wanted to live. The snow continued to fall, the wind whispered past them, and as Emily stepped closer to him, letting the faint warmth of human connection seep into her frozen hands and heart, she realized that sometimes, the universe had a quiet way of placing people in your path exactly when you needed them, even on the coldest, loneliest nights, and she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Over the next few days, Emily couldn't stop thinking about Henry, the gentle man she had met on that cold winter evening, and when another chance for a walk arose, she found herself drawn to the same streets, hoping to see him again, and as if by some quiet magic, he was there, leaning against the lamppost, smiling as though no time had passed, and immediately the world felt lighter, less lonely, as they began to walk side by side, the snow crunching under their feet, their breaths mingling in the cold air, and Emily felt a sense of anticipation she hadn't realized she missed, a thrill at simply being near someone who listened with patience and attention, whose presence seemed to fill the spaces she hadn't even known were empty. Henry spoke of small things at first, stories of neighborhoods he had walked, concerts he had attended, students he had taught who went on to do remarkable things, and Emily listened, fascinated, captivated by the depth and texture of his life, the way he could make ordinary experiences feel rich with meaning, and she found herself sharing her own stories, bits of herself she rarely revealed to anyone, her dreams, her disappointments, her secret longings, and he received each word with care. Nodding, asking gentle questions, and offering soft reflections that made her feel valued, heard, and understood. There was a rhythm to their conversations, a flow that seemed natural and effortless, like two rivers merging into one, and Emily felt a curiosity stirring inside her, a desire to know not just the stories he told but the person beneath them, the life he had lived, the joys and heartaches that had shaped him, and she noticed the small things about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the careful movements of his hands, the pauses in his speech that suggested thoughts lingering beneath the surface, and each detail made him feel more real, more tangible, and yet more mysterious, as though he carried a quiet secret she had not yet discovered. With each passing evening, the snow continued to fall, sometimes lightly, sometimes in thick flurries, covering the streets and giving the city a magical, otherworldly quality, and Emily realized that these walks had become something she looked forward to, a pause in the business of her life, a moment of calm and warmth that seemed almost sacred, and she began to notice how her heart raced when he looked at her with that soft, knowing smile, how her mind lingered on his words long after they parted, how she found herself imagining what it would be like to share more time with him, to explore the depth of his mind and heart, to simply exist in his presence without fear or hesitation. Henry, for his part, seemed equally drawn to her, his stories becoming more personal, more revealing, as though he sensed that she was someone he could trust, someone who would understand without judgment. And he spoke of memories tinged with bittersweet emotions, lost friendships, moments of regret, the quiet ache of time passing, and Emily listened with empathy, feeling an unexpected connection, a bridge forming between two people who had walked separate paths, but were now intersecting in a delicate, almost fated way, their footsteps aligning in the snow, their breaths mingling, their silences comfortable, yet charged with unspoken questions, curiosities, and a subtle tension that neither had named but both felt. Sometimes, he would pause mid-sentence, glance at her with a soft intensity, and then continue as if nothing had happened, and Emily caught herself wondering what he was thinking, whether he felt the same pull, the same strange mixture of longing and hesitation, and each thought made her heart flutter, the air between them electric yet gentle, warm despite the cold surrounding them. The city lights reflected on the snow-covered streets, creating patterns that danced around their feet as they walked, and Emily realized that the world had become more vivid, colors brighter, sounds sharper, moments richer, whenever she was with him, as if Henry's presence alone could transform an ordinary winter evening into something memorable, something worth holding on to, even if only for a fleeting time. She began to notice how he reacted to the world in subtle ways. The way he would pause to admire a decorated window, the quiet reverence with which he spoke of music, the tenderness in his tone when he recalled moments that mattered to him, and she found herself longing to know more, to peel back layers of experience and emotion, to understand the man who had so unexpectedly become central to her thoughts, her days, and now, her evenings. Yet, beneath the warmth, there was a subtle sadness, a shadow in Henry's eyes that Emily could not quite name, a hint of a story untold, a past that had shaped him and left traces in his smile and his pauses, and it made her heart ache with a strange mixture of curiosity and empathy, a desire to comfort him, to know the things he had never shared, and perhaps, in some small way, to be part of his healing or his joy. She realized that these walks were no longer just about clearing her mind or escaping the loneliness that sometimes pressed down on her. They had become a space of quiet intimacy, a place where trust was building with each step, each shared laugh, each word spoken under the snow-laden sky, and the more time she spent with him, the more she felt a gentle pull, an emotional tension that was thrilling and tender, exciting and comforting all at once. Emily began to imagine the possibilities, the future that might exist if these walks continued, if the connection deepened, if the warmth they shared could become something more enduring, and yet a part of her held back, cautious, aware that this was new, fragile, and untested, as delicate as the snowflakes falling around them, melting before they touched the ground, beautiful but temporary, and she wondered whether she should confess her growing feelings, whether she could, or whether some things were meant to remain unspoken, lingering in the quiet spaces between them, adding layers to their slow, unfolding story. Henry, walking beside her, seemed to sense her thoughts without words, his eyes occasionally meeting hers with a depth that spoke of understanding, of a recognition of shared solitude, of mutual appreciation for the moment they were creating together, and Emily felt her chest tighten with both anticipation and a quiet fear, knowing that these evenings were becoming the highlight of her weeks, the moments she counted on, and that with each step, she was allowing herself to care, to hope, and to feel something she hadn't dared to in a long time. The city around them moved on, people hurrying home, lights flickering in apartment windows, the sounds of distant traffic barely audible, yet in their little bubble of snow and lamplight, the world seemed to stand still, allowing them to exist in a space where time slowed, emotions deepened, and connections formed quietly, but undeniably. And Emily realized, with a mixture of wonder and apprehension, that she was falling into a story she hadn't expected to be part of, one that was mysterious, tender, and slowly pulling her heart in directions she couldn't yet fully understand, a story that promised warmth, connection, and perhaps, if she allowed herself to believe, something more profound than either of them had imagined. As winter deepened, Emily found herself looking forward to the evenings more than anything else, the thought of walking with Henry filling her with a warmth she hadn't felt in years, and when she stepped out into the frosty air, boots crunching against the fresh snow, she could already sense his presence, standing there with his familiar calm smile, as if the cold had no power over the quiet energy that seemed to surround him, and together they walked, sharing stories that now carried a new intimacy, revealing personal details and small confessions that made them both laugh, sometimes pause, sometimes feel the gentle pull of emotions neither had fully named yet. Each conversation carried layers, a mix of nostalgia, unspoken longing, and the fragile excitement of discovering someone who could touch the heart in ways that surprised her, and Emily realized she was noticing everything about him, the slight silver in his hair, the way his eyes softened when he spoke of the past, the gentle tremor in his hands when he gestured to describe a memory, the quiet strength in his voice, and the subtle ways he made her feel seen, valued, understood, and yet intrigued, as though he was a mystery she couldn't fully solve, but wanted desperately to explore. There were moments of silence too, comfortable pauses that spoke louder than words, the sound of snow underfoot, distant traffic, and the occasional laugh escaping them, small and light, weaving a thread of closeness that tightened with every shared evening. And Emily began to notice a change in herself, a softness in her steps, a flutter in her chest when he glanced at her, a warmth that spread from her heart to her fingertips even in the biting cold. Henry seemed equally affected by her presence, his stories growing richer with detail, tinged with subtle emotion that suggested he was opening old wounds just enough to let her in, sharing joys and regrets alike, allowing her glimpses into a life that had been both full and quietly lonely, and Emily felt a surge of empathy, admiration, and something more delicate, a tender affection that made her hesitate to speak, yet she longed to bridge the distance that remained between them. Each time he laughed at a memory or shared an observation about the world, her heart seemed to lift, as if responding to an unspoken connection, and she began to anticipate his gestures, the rhythm of his words, the small ways he leaned slightly toward her when making a point or smiled with a softness reserved only for those he trusted, and Emily realized she was caught in a quiet tension, an emotional current that pulled her toward him even as part of her wondered if she was moving too fast. Too deeply, too eagerly. They began to notice patterns in their walks, subtle routines that brought comfort, Henry pausing at certain corners to point out lights reflecting on the snow, Emily smiling at a familiar shop window, a shared glance or laugh creating moments that felt almost private in a city full of strangers, and these small rituals strengthened the connection in ways that were gentle but undeniable, creating a sense of anticipation and longing that neither fully understood but both welcomed with open hearts. At times, Henry would pause, gaze at the horizon, and speak softly of moments from his past that hinted at loss, unfulfilled dreams, or loves that had slipped through his fingers, and Emily listened, sensing a depth of experience that made her own life feel suddenly larger and more connected to the world around her, and though the sadness in his words tugged at her heart, it also created a bond, a shared understanding that was intimate without needing labels, romantic without needing promises. Delicate yet powerful, like a fragile branch bending under the weight of snow, beautiful in its tension. Emily began to feel the subtle thrill of possibility, imagining what a life spent alongside Henry might be like, the quiet companionship, the laughter, the shared silences, and yet a whisper of fear lingered in her mind, the question of whether these evenings were only temporary, whether the warmth she felt might fade like the fleeting snowflakes melting on her gloves, and each walk became a balancing act between hope and caution, longing and patience. She noticed how Henry's eyes sometimes lingered on her longer than necessary, a soft intensity that sent shivers down her spine and made her heart beat faster, and she began to interpret his gestures, the gentle nods, the slight lean closer when they talked, the way he seemed to align his pace with hers, as evidence of a mutual attraction neither had voiced but both seemed to feel, and the awareness of this emotional tension made every word, every look, every pause feel charged, electric, yet tender, thrilling yet safe. Emily found herself daydreaming about these walks during her ordinary routines, imagining his smile, the warmth of his voice, the comfort of shared silences, and she realized that she was falling into a quiet infatuation, a delicate mix of admiration, respect, and something more romantic, a yearning for a closeness that went beyond friendship, yet remained beautifully restrained, as if both of them were tiptoeing along the edge of something neither wanted to rush, something fragile and precious. Even the cold seemed to play a role, heightening the intimacy, making the shared moments of warmth, laughter, and conversation feel more poignant, as if the chill outside was a contrast to the heat that grew between them, subtle and unspoken, and Emily felt a new awareness of her own feelings, the way her chest fluttered, her hands tingled, and her thoughts lingered on him long after their walks ended. Henry, in turn, shared glimpses of vulnerability, stories tinged with melancholy or reflection, and Emily responded with gentle understanding, admiration, and a desire to comfort, to connect, to be close in a way that transcended ordinary friendship, and this emotional reciprocity created a tension that was romantic, profound, and completely consuming, yet never rushed, never forced, simply allowed to unfold naturally under the quiet glow of winter streetlights. They spoke less about ordinary concerns now, more about dreams, regrets, desires, and the intricacies of human connection, their conversations layered with meaning, laughter, and sometimes pauses that conveyed more than words ever could, and Emily began to realize that these moments were teaching her something essential about herself, about intimacy, about trust, and about the possibility of experiencing a gentle, slow-burning romance with someone whose presence brought both comfort and Excitement. The snow continued to fall, thick and soft, creating a cocoon around them, muffling sounds, turning the streets into a private world where their connection could deepen without interruption, and Emily felt the pull of emotion, a quiet ache of longing, and a tender hopefulness that made her heart swell with feelings she couldn't yet name, a mixture of attraction, admiration, empathy, and an almost magnetic desire to be near him, to linger, to walk together until the night grew too cold to bear, and yet neither of them wanted the moment to end. Each evening, their walks became a subtle dance of emotional exploration, the rhythm of conversation, laughter, silences, and shared observations creating a tapestry of connection, and Emily realized that what was growing between them was more than friendship, more than curiosity, more than casual affection. It was the start of something meaningful, fragile, and profoundly romantic, a bond built not on grand gestures, but on the quiet intimacy of time shared, stories exchanged, hearts recognized, and the slow, beautiful unfolding of emotions that could change the course of their lives. And in that gentle winter world, Emily knew that her life had quietly shifted, that she was experiencing something rare and extraordinary, a romance that was tender, emotional, and full of tension, and that each walk with Henry was teaching her to feel deeply, hope carefully, and embrace the subtle magic of connection that could blossom even on the coldest nights. One evening, as the snow fell heavier than usual and the streetlights glowed like faint lanterns through the thick air, Emily hurried to their usual meeting spot, expecting to see Henry's familiar figure waiting with that gentle, reassuring smile. But instead the lamppost was empty, and a strange hollow feeling settled in her chest, a sudden awareness that something had changed, and as she looked closer, she noticed a small envelope tucked carefully into the base of the post, her name written in Henry's elegant script, and her hands trembled as she picked it up, sensing that whatever was inside would shift everything between them. She tore it open and began to read, and the words pulled her into a whirlwind of emotion, as Henry spoke candidly, honestly, in a way he never had in person, sharing details of his life that were raw and beautiful, filled with memories of love lost, friends who had passed, regrets that lingered in quiet corners of his heart, and moments of joy that had been fleeting but precious. And Emily felt tears prick her eyes, her breath catching with each sentence, as though she were discovering the depth of him in ways she hadn't imagined, realizing that the connection she had felt was real, profound, and yet painfully fleeting, because he explained that he was leaving the city, moving to be closer to family, to face obligations that could not be postponed, and that his time in the neighborhood, the walks, the laughter, the shared silences, they were all about to end. He wrote that seeing her had brought unexpected happiness into his quiet life, that her presence had reminded him of the beauty of connection and the warmth of shared moments, and that he hoped she would remember these evenings as fondly as he would, but that he could not stay, that his path was pulling him away. And Emily felt a sudden, sharp ache, a combination of longing, heartbreak, and disbelief, her mind racing with memories of their walks, the subtle touches, the laughter, the conversations that had made her feel seen and valued in a way she hadn't known she needed. And now she faced the cruel twist of fate, the knowledge that someone who had become so important to her would be gone, leaving only words on paper, fragile and heartfelt, to fill the spaces where his presence had been. She read on, each sentence carrying a mixture of apology, gratitude, and hope, a tender farewell wrapped in love that could not be fulfilled. And Emily felt an overwhelming mix of emotions, sorrow for the loss, admiration for his honesty, and an almost desperate desire to see him one last time, to somehow change the outcome, to beg him to stay, to tell him that the connection they shared mattered more than distance or circumstance. Yet deep down, she knew that life did not always bend to the desires of the heart, that people sometimes had to leave, even when it was painful, even when the timing was cruel, and that this was a lesson in letting go even when the heart refused to follow. She folded the letter slowly, holding it to her chest, feeling the warmth of his words mingle with the chill in the air, and for the first time she realized that the bond they had formed, tender, delicate, and romantic, was now suspended in a liminal space between presence and absence, a story half told that would live on in memory and feeling rather than in ongoing reality. And yet, even as she shivered in the cold, her heart ached with gratitude for the fleeting beauty of it, for the way a simple winter walk had transformed her world, for the quiet intimacy that had grown between them in such a short span of time, and for the way he had made her feel alive, seen and touched by something rare and extraordinary. The city around her moved on, lights twinkling behind frosted windows, cars slipping along icy streets, but Emily remained rooted to the spot, the envelope. Clutched in her hand, feeling the weight of absence, the profound emptiness of someone leaving, and yet also the lingering warmth of what had been, the tender emotions that refused to vanish, and the understanding that some connections were not meant to last forever, but were still powerful enough to leave indelible marks on the heart, shaping the way one experienced love, longing, and human closeness. She thought of Henry's soft smiles, the way he had listened without judgment, the depth of his gaze that seemed to see parts of her she had hidden even from herself, and a gentle ache of regret and desire spread through her, a bittersweet mixture that made her steps falter as she walked home, the snow swirling around her like memories in motion. And in that moment, Emily knew that life was unpredictable, that beauty often arrived quietly and departed just as silently, that love did not always need to be sustained to be meaningful, and that even fleeting encounters could transform one's world, leaving echoes of warmth, tenderness, and emotional resonance that would linger long after the person was gone, a reminder of connection, intimacy, and the delicate complexity of human hearts meeting in the right way at the wrong time. As she reached her apartment, the envelope still pressed to her chest, she whispered Henry's name into the cold night, feeling both sorrow and gratitude, and a quiet hope lingered inside her, a hope that the memory of their walks, their shared words, and the fragile, emotional bond they had created would continue to shape her, reminding her that even brief encounters could leave lasting impressions, and that sometimes the most meaningful moments in life came wrapped in impermanence, in stories that were beautiful precisely because they could not last forever, leaving Emily with a heart full of emotion, longing, and a tender ache that would remain, shaping her understanding of love, connection, and the fragile beauty of human intimacy.